Today I'll be comparing the Sony 16 to 35mm f4 power zoom to the Tamron 20 to 40mm f2.8. I'll be going over range, sharpness, bokeh, and more chapters in the description. Before we go over these other subjects, let's talk about the build of these lenses. Both of these are small lenses. However, starting off with the Tamron, this is a very basic build. There's no switches, knobs, or rings. All it has is a USB-C input for firmware updates. The Sony, on the other hand, has an AF/MF, AF on switch. It has a power zoom rocker, iris control, click or de-click. It has an aperture ring. This thing is the full works despite being only a G lens. Both lenses are fairly small and lightweight and come in around 360 to 70 grams. What makes it more difficult to compare is the focal range. The Tamron is shifted a little bit longer all the way through, and it has an added aperture of one full stop. How much of a difference does that make? Here's a look at 16 millimeters versus 20 millimeters. There's a dramatic difference in width for the advantage of the Sony and a dramatic difference in bokeh for the advantage of the Tamron. Which is your preference? Let me know in the comments below. Next is 35mm f4 compared to 40mm f2.8. 5mm on the long side isn't as dramatic as 4mm on the wide side, according to every heterosexual female past or present. That said, here is the comparison, and I probably don't even have to label the clips. You can figure out which is which. When it comes to flaring, both lenses perform well. This is the Tamron at this widest, and compared to the Sony doesn't have as much flare, but it's more distinct, and I like the characteristics of it. On the long end, which the hood is not very optimal for, the Tamron has a little bit of flaring. It's not a whole lot, and when it comes to the Sony, there is even less. Take a look at this. There's almost no flare on the long end. So if you want a flare perfect type of performance, take a look at the Sony. When it comes to autofocus, I chose this area where there's a very high contrast scenario, trying to trick the system with the backlight and the shading. And on top of that, I chose to go slow on purpose because I'm looking for that smooth transition to see which one performs better. The Sony, as you can see, it performs very well as expected. Even with the slow setting, it doesn't get confused very often. And when I go into the shadow, it tracks me just fine. When it comes to the Tamron, if you watch closely, you can see that once I go into the shadow of the sign, it kind of loses me in a second, and it takes a little bit longer to acquire again. So in this category, it seems like the Sony is the clear winner. However, this is just one scenario. When it comes to photos and videos in general, it's generally not an issue. It's just when you want that extra smooth type of tracking. When it comes to focus breathing, we will start off looking at how the Tamron performs. And based on my previous review, it performs decent. Here's the wide end at 20. The outer edges of the fencing do not expand and contract. It's fairly well controlled on the wide end. However, at the longer end, there is definitely an expansion going on. As you can see, the retraction, and here again, once the expansion. Next up is the Sony, and based on my previous review, the focus breathing behaves fairly well. As you can see right here, there is no expansion or retraction on the outer edges, and it is fairly controlled. If you're doing a lot closer, yeah, it might show up. However, there is focus breathing correction on some of the newer bodies. Here's the longer end. And you can see it's very controlled. You don't really need to use any corrections. It is good right off the bat. When it comes to sharpness, you have to keep in mind that the Tamron is a stop faster, so it has a stop to go down before it even matches f4. That said, Here it is, wide open. Both of them are wide open, and the center is, they're both good. And what you're going to notice between these two lenses is that you generally get comparable sharpness, except for wide open. There might be a little bit more on the Sony or a little bit less on the Tamron. Here they are side by side, and you can see that they're quite sharp most of the frame. The difference is at the very edge of the frame. Wide open, you see that the Tamron has a little bit of degradation, and the Sony is just a pinch sharper. So that's wide open. However, things change at f5.6. You'll see that at this aperture, they look almost identical. It's really hard to tell which is which. Well, except for that the Tamron's more magnified. But other than that, they are very, very close to each other. One is at 16 millimeters, the other at 20 millimeters. It's kind of hard to compare the two because, well, the 16 is wider. On the longer end, it's more of the same story. But before I get to that, I want to mention that I don't think either one of these lenses has much of an issue when it comes to chromatic aberration. So you can mark that off to your list. Starting off at the long end wide open, you can see that the Sony is definitely sharper, and this changes a bit from the previous test. At the long end stop down to f5.6, both are good in the center, and most of the frame, I would say 95% of the frame, both are very good. It's just that at the very, very extreme corner, you know, if you're obsessing over that, then the Tamron is considerably stronger. Either way, I don't think you're going to have an issue when it comes to sharpness with either one of these lenses. When it comes to Sunstars, I'm looking at it, and on the smaller screen, I think the Tamron looks better. However, on close inspection, the Sony certainly does look cleaner. It's just that that center blob is kind of large. So I prefer the Tamron, but technically the Sony is cleaner. On the subject of vlogging, one is 16, one is 20. With active stabilization, is 20 wide enough? Here is 16 millimeters with the Sony. And now let's have a look at the Tamron. 20 millimeters with active stave. Is it good enough for you? I think it is. However, that's just one person's opinion. Here's another vlog test. However, this time we're testing it with low light as well. That one stop aperture for the Tamron, that means that it's at 6400. That means that the Sony is at 12800. What difference does it make? Let's have a look. What I find interesting is not exactly the noise level, it's just that the Sony is way off on the white balance. I'm going to try to correct it, and you should see that right about now. And it's not the best job, so keep that in mind because of the low light issue. Your white balance can go way off. The noise, I don't find it too offending. Now this wouldn't be an ultra wide comparison if there wasn't drama. 20 millimeters right here in your face, there is some drama. However, 16 millimeters, there is a lot of drama. And that is the reason why some people get an ultra wide lens. You need that drama. And some of you need that drama with video as well. You need that fast moving, fast action type of look. Here it is at 20 millimeters, and you'll see that, well, everything's nice and wide. However, it doesn't have quite the drama of 16 millimeters. As you can see, the sides are much more stretched, and it appears to be moving a lot faster, even though it isn't. Final thoughts. The 16-35 power zoom. It is just so nifty having this power zoom function. You can zoom in, or in this case, zoom out nice and slow, and you can make that a dramatic effect. And of course, I love using it for landscapes, for video, or for photos. However, when it comes to people, that is where the Tamron excels. Having that extra f2.8, having that extra reach, it can be helpful. It can blur the backgrounds just like how you want it to be. You're using a big sensor. You want it all blurry in the background, nice and creamy. Well, this is not going to give you that. It's only f2.8. However, you get the point. It's still better than f4. I just find that it handles people extremely well, so I like using it in those scenarios. That said, would I be adverse to using f4 for people? Absolutely not. Both of these lenses being so small and discreet, you can just bring it around and point it any which direction you want. You can shoot people with the 16 to 35 power zoom. There's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not totally against that either. But when it comes to optimal range, starting out at 20, ending at 40 is quite a bit better than 16 to 35 for people, because you don't want to get that extra wide unless you have somebody dead center frame. That's just the way it is. And is it wide enough? You be the judge. I think it is. Even with very big, gigantic structures, I don't see this as a major problem. It's just a step or two back, or you just deal with it as it is, because it's beyond what the natural eye can see. Much beyond that. So at the end of the day, you have to make your own decision. I mean, you're going to have to pick, what do you prioritize? If you prioritize landscape photography, the 16 to 35 is without doubt a better choice. However, if you do a bit of travel and mix in photography, more of a hybrid type of style, then the f2.8 rolls. If you've used either one of these lenses, let me know in the comments below which one you prefer. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, share. See you in the next one. Take care.